In the late 1970s, an Indian intelligence service confirmed that its neighbor was building an atomic bomb. It did so without ever sending an officer across the fence at the plant. According to accounts published by former officers of India's Research and Analysis Wing. The proof came from a barbershop near the town of Kahuta, in the hills outside Rawalpindi. Scientists from the enrichment plant got their hair cut there. An agent collected the clippings from the floor. The clippings traveled back to a laboratory, and the laboratory read in them the signature of weapons-grade uranium. It was, by reputation, one of the most elegant penetrations in the history of South Asian espionage. And then, by the same accounts, it was given away. From the very top of the Indian government. This is Operation Kahuta. On the 18th of May, 1974, India detonated a nuclear device beneath the Thar Desert at Pokhran. New Delhi called it a peaceful explosion. In Islamabad, no one believed that phrase for a moment. The Pakistani Prime Minister had already made his country's answer plain. By his own widely quoted words, his nation would eat grass if it had to. But it would build a bomb of its own. After India's test, that resolve hardened into a national program. Its instrument was a metallurgist named Abdul Qadir Khan. Khan had worked in Europe for a uranium-enrichment consortium that operated gas centrifuge plants. He had access to the consortium's centrifuge designs and its network of component suppliers. In 1975, he left Europe and returned to Pakistan. In 1976, he was given autonomous control of a national uranium enrichment effort, and he began to build it in the foothills near a small town called Kahuta, outside Rawalpindi. The choice of the gas centrifuge mattered enormously. Natural uranium is overwhelmingly the heavy, useless isotope. Less than 1 part in 100 is the light isotope that actually splits in a chain reaction. A gas centrifuge spins uranium hexafluoride at the edge of what metal can survive, throwing the heavier atoms outward and concentrating the lighter ones toward the center. Thousands of these machines, chained together in a cascade, can lift the concentration of the light isotope from below 1% toward the 90% that a weapon demands. The same hardware that makes reactor fuel makes bomb cores. The only difference is how long you let it run. Khan did not build this program from nothing. The European consortium he had worked for ran some of the most advanced gas centrifuge plants on Earth, and Khan had moved through their facilities with the access of a trusted technical employee. When he returned home, he carried not only design knowledge, but the names and addresses of the specialist suppliers across Europe, who manufactured the precision components a centrifuge cascade requires. The high-strength rotor tubes, the vacuum systems, the specialized bearings, the inverters that drive the motors at their punishing speeds. Pakistan's program could place orders with the very firms that had supplied the consortium, often through front companies and intermediaries, assembling a national enrichment capability out of parts bought quietly on the open market. This is why the program moved as fast as it did. It was not reinventing the centrifuge, it was reassembling one it already understood. On the Indian side of the border, the Research and Analysis Wing was handed the problem. The service was young, founded only in 1968, and by the late 1970s, its founding chief had retired and been succeeded at the head of the service by a senior officer who would lead it through this period. The mission was not simply to confirm that the Kahuta plant existed. Satellite imagery could establish that much. A gray rectangle of buildings behind a fence tells you a plant is there. It does not tell you what is happening inside it. The mission was to answer the one question that imagery could not. How far had the enrichment actually gone? Was Kahuta producing weapons-grade uranium, or was it still years from that threshold? The difference between those two answers was the difference between a distant worry and an immediate one. The plant was sealed, it was guarded. It sat in difficult terrain in the heart of the Pakistani military's own region, ringed by security. It could not be entered, and an officer caught trying would have been a catastrophe in itself. The answer would have to be pulled out of the air around it, from the ordinary life that no fence could fully wall off. The Research and Analysis Wing could not put an officer inside the Kahuta plant. So, by the accounts of its former officers, it did not try. Instead, it built a network in the ordinary life that surrounded the plant. The world of drivers and shopkeepers and tradesmen who served the scientists working behind the fence. At the center of the story is a barbershop. The scientists who worked at Kahuta were men with families and routines. They lived in the area and they got their hair cut at local shops, the same as anyone else. And here lies the elegance of the method that the published raw accounts describe. A man who works inside a uranium enrichment plant handles uranium compounds day after day. No protective routine is perfect. Over weeks and months, microscopic traces of the materials he handles are deposited on his skin and in his hair. Hair grows slowly, and as it grows, it records that exposure along its lengths, the way a slow tape records sound. A clipping of that hair, analyzed in a sensitive laboratory, can be made to reveal not just that a man was exposed to uranium, but to uranium of a particular enrichment level. The hair carries the secret of the plant out through the front door of the barbershop, on the heads of the very men sworn to keep it. According to the published accounts, an agent collected the swept clippings from the barbershop floor. The hair was folded into paper, moved along a courier chain across the countryside and the border region, and carried into an Indian laboratory. At no point did any Indian officer enter the plant. At no point was any device placed inside the fence. The most sensitive secret in Pakistan was carried out of the country in a fold of waxed paper, by a network that never had to cross the wire. It must be said plainly that this barbershop detail rests largely on the memoirs of former Indian intelligence officers, and it has never been confirmed by any government. It is, in the most literal sense, an unverified story. But it is the story those who served have chosen to tell, and the science underneath it is real. Trace analysis of human hair for isotope exposure is a genuine technique. The question the laboratory now had to answer was the only one that mattered. In an Indian laboratory, the collected hair was processed, and its uranium content measured by mass spectrometry. The instrument separates atoms by their weight and counts them one by one. What it measures is a ratio, the proportion of the light, fissile isotope to the heavy, common one. That ratio is the enrichment signature, and it cannot lie about itself. A ratio near the natural level would have meant the plant was producing reactor fuel or nothing useful at all. A ratio climbing toward 90% would mean only one thing. By the accounts that have been published, the reading came back high. The hair carried the signature of weapons-grade uranium. Pakistan had not merely built an enrichment plant. By this analysis, it had crossed the threshold that separates a power program from a weapons program. This is the moment the entire operation existed to produce. A sealed plant in a foreign country had been read from the outside, through nothing more than the hair of the men who worked inside it. The Research and Analysis Wing had answered the unanswerable question, and the answer traveled up through the Indian government to the very top. It is worth pausing on what that answer meant. India had tested a device of its own only a few years earlier. Now it faced the certainty of a second nuclear-armed state directly across its most contested border, a state with which it had already fought 3 wars. The hair from a barbershop floor had turned a fear into a fact. The hardest part of the intelligence cycle, the collection, was complete, and it had succeeded against a target almost no service in the world could have reached. What happened next is the part of this story that India's intelligence veterans have spent 40 years unable to forgive. What India's intelligence veterans have written is this. In a telephone conversation with the Pakistani military ruler, late in 1978 or early in 1979, the Indian Prime Minister told him, in substance, that India knew about the enrichment work at Kahuta. The Prime Minister was an old man of austere Gandhian conviction, deeply suspicious of intelligence services, and by the accounts of those who served under him, openly hostile to the very idea of running spies. The military ruler on the other end of the line had cultivated a careful, flattering telephone friendship with him over many months, and in one of those conversations, by the raw veteran's telling, the old man let slip what India knew. The damage of those words was not in the fact that India knew. It was in what the knowledge implied. To know the enrichment level at a sealed plant, India had to have a source close to it. The disclosure pointed straight back toward the network that had produced the intelligence. By the published accounts, the other side worked backward from the plant's social surroundings, traced the contacts and the couriers, and broke the network that India had so patiently built. The barbershop went quiet. The chair sat empty. The ordinary life that had concealed the operation was emptied of it, and the people who had served the network were lost to it. Here the duty of honesty becomes heaviest. This phone call account comes principally from the memoirs of former Indian intelligence officers, most prominently a senior RAW veteran who wrote about it years later. It is, inside India, a fiercely partisan story, used as a weapon in domestic politics by one side against another. There is no recording, there is no transcript. There is no official confirmation that the call happened as described, or that it caused the losses laid at its door. Other historians caution that intelligence networks are lost for many reasons, and that a single phone call is a tidy explanation for what may have been a messy collapse. This channel cannot tell you that the call happened exactly as the veterans describe it. No one outside that conversation can. What is far less disputed is the outcome. Whatever the precise cause, India's window into Kahuta closed, and it did not reopen. A penetration that ranks among the most elegant in the region's history ended not with a raid or a defection, but by the bitter account of the men who ran it, with a few unguarded words spoken from the very top of their own government. The most painful failures in intelligence are rarely the ones the enemy earns. They are the ones the home side gives away. The bomb that the barbershop hair detected in the hills near Kahuta did not stay a secret forever. On the 28th of May, 1998, Pakistan announced itself to the world with 5 underground nuclear tests in the Balochistan desert. They were a direct answer to 5 Indian tests conducted 2 weeks earlier, across the border in the Rajasthan sand. Within a single month, in the spring of 1998, South Asia became home to 2 declared nuclear powers, facing each other across the most militarized frontier on the planet. The intelligence that the Research and Analysis Wing pulled out of a barbershop floor had been, by the accounts of those who ran it, correct all along. The enrichment was real. The threshold had been crossed. The only thing the operation could not do was stop what it had discovered. The metallurgist who built Kahuta did not stop there either. In the decades that followed, the same network of suppliers and knowledge that had armed Pakistan became, by the findings of international investigators, a private proliferation enterprise. Centrifuge designs and components were sold onward to other states that wanted a bomb of their own. The single most consequential figure in the spread of nuclear weapons technology in the late 20th century grew directly out of the program that the barbershop hair had first read. When that network was finally exposed in the early 2000s, it confirmed what the hair clippings had hinted at a quarter-century earlier. The thing being built in the hills near Kahuta was not just a national weapon. It was a machine for making more. But the operation proved something that outlives the bomb it found. The most penetrating intelligence does not always require crossing the fence. A sealed and impenetrable target can be read from the trace evidence that its own people carry, unknowing, into the ordinary world around it. A barber's broom and a fold of waxed paper did what no satellite and no raid could do. The target carried the proof out through its own front door. And the operation proved one more thing, the harder lesson. The one its veterans have never stopped grieving. A source that the enemy could not reach can still be lost. Not to a raid, not to a defector, but to a few careless words from the side that the source was risking everything to serve. So we close with the question the Barbershop Network would want you to sit with. If your own service ran a source so deep that no fence could keep it out, a source that read your most dangerous adversary from the inside of their own secret, and that source was then given away by a careless voice at the very top of your own government, would anyone ever tell you it had happened? Or would the barber's chair simply go empty, the broom lean against the wall, and the file quietly close, with no one outside the room ever told who gave it away? The session is logged. The connection is closed. The files remain open.